In this section, we're going to learn how to implement authentication functionality with Apollo and GraphQL to provide a login to the user. As in sections before, we're going to set the stage for login functionality by preparing the React components that are needed for this feature. You'll start by implementing the login component. Create a new file in the components directory and call it login.js. Then paste the following code inside of it. Let's quickly understand the structure of this new component. This component can have two major states. One state for users that already have an account and only need to log in. In this case, the component will only render two input fields, one for the email and the other for the password. Notice that state.login will be true in this case. The second state is for users that haven't created an account yet and thus still need to sign up. Here, we also render a third input where we could provide a name. In this case, state.login will be false. We have a method called confirm, which will be used to implement the mutations that we need to send for login functionality. We also need to provide the constants.js file that we use to define the keys for the credentials that we're storing in the browser's local storage. In source, create a new file called constants.js and add the following two definitions. With that component in place, you can go and add a new route to your React Router DOM setup. Open up app.js and update the render function to include the new route. Also, import the login component on top of the same file. And finally, let's go add the link component to the header that allows users to navigate to the login page. Let's open up header.js and update the render function to look as follows. We first retrieve the user ID from local storage. If the user ID is not available, the submit button won't be rendered anymore. That way we only make sure that authenticated users can create new links. We're also adding a second button to the right of the header. This allows users to log in and log out. Lastly, you need to import the key definitions from constants.js in linklist.js. Add the following statement to the top of the file. Here's what the ready component looks like. Before we can implement the authentication functionality in login.js, we need to prepare the GraphQL project and enable authentication on the server side. To enable email and password authentication, we need to go to the directory where project.graphql is located and type the following into the terminal: GraphQL console. This will open up the GraphQL console, the web UI that allows you to configure your GraphQL project. Select the Integrations tab in the left side menu and then click on the Email Password Auth integration. This will open the pop-up that allows you to enable GraphQL's email-based authentication mechanism. In the pop-up, simply click Enable. Having the email and password auth provider enables two new mutations in the project's API. First, we have a create user mutation. This will allow us to create a user. And two, we have sign in user. This allows us to log in an existing user. The sign in user returns a sign in user payload. This just bundles information about the user and token. Next, we need to make sure that the changes introduced by the authentication provider are reflected in your local project file. You can use the GraphQL pull API to update your local schema file with changes that happen remotely. Open up a terminal window and navigate to the directory where project.graphql is located. Then run the following command: GraphQL pull. Just a note, before the remote schema gets fetched, you'll be asked to confirm that you want to override the current project file. You can confirm by typing Y. This will bump the schema version to 2 and update the user type to also have the email and password fields. Next, we need to make one more modification to the schema. Generally, when updating the schema of a GraphQL project, you have two ways of doing so. First, we could use the web-based GraphQL console and change the schema directly. Or, we can use the GraphQL project file and the CLI to update the schema from our local machines. Let's open up our project.graphql file and update the user and link types as follows. We're adding two things to the schema. We're adding a new field on user to store the name of the user, and we're adding a new relation between the user and the link that represents a one-to-many relationship and expresses that one user can be associated with multiple links. The relation manifests itself into two fields, posted by and links. Save the file and execute the command in the terminal, GraphQL push. We should see this terminal output after you run the command. Side note, you can also use GraphQL status after making changes to the schema to preview the potential changes that would be performed with GraphQL push. Perfect. You're all set now to actually implement the authentication functionality inside your app. Now that we've updated our schema, let's implement the login mutations. CreateUser and SignUser are two regular GraphQL mutations that you can use in the same way as we did with the createLink mutation. Open up login.js and add the following two definitions to the bottom of the file. Let's also replace the current export statement. Here, we're using the compose function to combine more than one mutation and wrap our component. Before we take a closer look at the two mutations, let's go ahead and add the required imports. In login.js, add the following statement to the top of the file. We're going to import GQL, GraphQL, and Compose from React Apollo. Let's understand what's going on in the two mutations you just added. The sign-in user mutation looks very similar to the mutations we saw before. It simply takes the email and password as arguments and returns info about the user as well as a token. We can attach this token to subsequent requests to authenticate the user. We'll go into that in a bit. The createUser mutation, however, is a little bit different. Here, we actually define two mutations at once. When you're doing that, the execution order is always from top to bottom. So in your case, the createUser mutation will be executed before the sign-in user mutation. Bundling two mutations like this allows us to sign up and log in a single request. Alright, all that's left to do is call the two mutations inside the code. Let's open up login.js and implement the confirm function as follows. This code is pretty straightforward. If the user wants to only log in, we're going to call the sign-in user mutation and pass the provided email and password as arguments. Otherwise, we're going to use the createUser mutation where we also pass the user's name. After the mutation was performed, you're storing the ID and token in local storage and navigating back to the root. We can now create an account by providing a name, email, and password. Once you did that, the submit button should be rendered again. Since we can authenticate users and also add new relations between link and user types, we need to make sure that every new link that gets created in the app can store information about the user that posted it. That's what the posted by field on link will be used for. Open up createLink.js and update the definition of createLink mutation as follows. There are two major changes here. First, we add another argument to the mutation that represents the ID of the user that is posting the link. Second, we include the posted by information in the payload of the mutation. We need to make sure that the ID of the posting user is included when you're calling the mutation in createLink. In createLink, update the implementation of createLink like so. For this to work, we also need to import the GCUserID key. Let's add the following import statement to the top of createLink.js. Perfect. Before sending the mutation, we are now retrieving the corresponding user ID from local storage. If that succeeds, you'll pass it to the call to createLink mutation, So every new link will from now on store information about the user who created it. If you haven't done so before, go ahead and test the login functionality. Run yarn start and open up localhost 3000/login. Then let's click the Need Create Account button and provide some user data for the user you're creating. Finally, click the Create Account button. If all went well, the app navigates back to the root and your user was created. You can verify that the new user is there by checking the data browser or sending the all users query in a playground. Now that users are able to log in and obtain a token that authenticates them against the GraphQL backend, we need to actually make sure that this token gets attached to all requests that are sent to the API. Since all API requests are actually created and sent by Apollo Client, we need to make sure Apollo Client knows about our user's token. Luckily, Apollo provides a nice way for authenticating requests by using middleware. Open up index.js and put the following code between the creation of the network interface and the instantiation of the Apollo client. Then, directly import the key that you need to retrieve from local storage on the top of the same file. We're going to import the GC auth token from Constance. That's it. Now all our API requests will be authenticated if a token is available. A quick note, in a real application, you would want to configure the authorization rules of your project to define what kind of operations authenticated and non-authenticated users should be allowed to perform.